All right, thank you, everybody. I'm delighted to welcome you all back to this season of the Management and Social Justice Conversation series. My name is Poonamallee, and I'm the Chair of Management Faculty at the New School. And this series has brought together academics, activists, and practitioner leaders and entrepreneurs who are all committed to learning, exploring, and experimenting with approaches on how to frame organizations as sites of social justice as against oppression and injustice, and how management as a discipline and practice can facilitate this transformation. And during this academic year, we've put together a series of panels and speakers focused on industries and sectors varying from technology, higher education, healthcare, and media. And in today's panel, we look at an industry that is crucial to our very existence, food. Food is medicine, food is health, access to food is a human right. We all need food to survive, grow, thrive, and flourish. But it is also a large economic enterprise. The food industrial complex is trillions of dollars in size and is expected to grow exponentially in the coming years. But even with trillions of dollars in the market, 1 in 4 people in the world are food insecure. And at the same time, due to overconsumption and increased consumption of processed foods, there is also a rise of metabolic diseases, which is tied very close to increased income, but also wealth inequalities. Like other resources, issues pertaining to food in terms of access and especially affordable food is mediated by socioeconomic and other demographic variables such as class, gender, race, geographic region, among others. Further, as we know, the situation is exacerbated by the climate change that we face today. And so today's incredible panel of activists and entrepreneurs will address some of these vital questions. And I'm so delighted to invite the panelists as well. And I'm particularly thrilled to invite Ashwin Gopi, who is a part-time faculty in the undergraduate management program at the New School, and Stacey, who is a Milano management alum. And I'm excited to hear from all the panelists. And I'm delighted that my colleague, Dr. Kristin Reynolds, who's the chair of the Food Studies program at the New School, accepted my invitation to both co-host the event and lead today's panel discussion. She's a critical food geographer based in New York City. Kristin's work focuses on the intersections of urban food systems, social justice, and food policy. As a co-founder and coordinator of an international community of practice around this topic, she leads and examines the meaning of and scalability of food justice in urban and rural spaces, while also examining the role of academics in advancing food justice. So before I hand you over to Dr. Reynolds, I would like to make some housekeeping instructions that this session is recorded. Please keep yourself muted and please add your question to the chat box and we will try to monitor and get to as many of the questions as possible. So thank you for joining everybody and over to you, Kristin.
Thank you very much, Dr. Poonamallee. And I want to also thank Jamie Parganos for collaborating to organize this event today, as well as Juana Kennedy, who's the Director of Administration in the Schools of Public Engagement at the New School, for her ongoing support in organizing our events. We are really delighted in Food Studies to be able to collaborate with the management program on this event today. And I always like to say a few words about our program. We are situated in the bachelor's program for adults and transfer students within the Schools of Public Engagement at the New School. Food Studies has associates, BA, and BS options with concentrations in 3 areas: culture, media, and communication, health and environment, and policy and politics. The program also accepts credits from certain culinary institutions, and some of our classes are open to the public through the Open Campus program at the university. We have a number of events like this one throughout the year, and some of them, like today's event, co-hosted with other programs at the university. And so in addition to this event today being part of the Management and Social Justice Conversation series, it's also part of the Food Studies Spring 2022 series called Critical Food Studies and Social Justice. So if you will allow me, I would like to read a few words about what this study is, what this series is about. So here I go. Food studies scholar and nutritionist Dr. Marion Nessel has observed that food studies has continually evolved alongside the food movement and has asked the field of food studies to contribute to, quote, changing the world. Dr. Psyche Williams-Forson, also a key food scholar situated in American studies, insists on bringing an intersectional approach to food studies. She argues that intersectionality theory's commitment to social justice and dismantling unjust power structures would strengthen food studies by allowing it to better understand the dynamics of the food system. Critical food geographer Julie Guthman observes that food justice researchers often seek to support food movements through their work. She pushes such scholars to do so with a commitment to the integrity of engaged scholarship and scientific inquiry. And so these influential thinkers and writers, among many others, illustrate the diversity and interdisciplinarity of food studies. Each of them analyzes food systems issues, including food as politics, racialized and gendered dimensions of food and foodways, and the hegemony of neoliberalism and food system, respectively, through what we can see as a critical lens that situates food systems injustices in broader social and political structures. Critical food studies helps us to understand food systems at levels deeper than the food that we eat, or even the specific cultural foodways with which we may be familiar as individuals or communities. But critical food studies is more than only study, and decidedly not the purview of academics alone. Knowledge creation and communication occurs through many venues, including design and urban planning, popular education, community organizing, social innovation, and music. So collectively, these understandings can help us make sense of the often complex food systems dynamics, as Latha was discussing. They're intertwining in social equity at multiple scales, and importantly, ways forward to a more just food system. So today's event and the Food Studies Program Spring Series engage with these ideas through a diverse lineup of panel discussions and multimedia presentations. So without further ado, it is my great pleasure to be able to introduce our panelists today. I will start with Cara Santino. They are the founder of the Restorative Justice Food Project at Emerge, Connecticut, and the Food Entrepreneurship Manager at City Seed, both in New Haven. Cara has 14 years of experience in the food industry. A former chef, Cara used their love of food and lived experiences with food insecurity and poverty to make the move from restaurants to community-based organizations to work with people who have been through similar circumstances. Cara graduated from Johnson Wales University in 2012 with a BS in Culinary Arts and Food Service Management, and they received an MS in Food Studies from Syracuse University in 2021. Next, Josefina Luna is a world citizen born on the Dominican Republic's North Coast. She's a founder of CERO, which stands for Cooperative Energy, Recycling, and Organics, and is CERO's current CFO and operations manager in Boston. She studied education and worked as a teacher for 15 years before moving to Boston in 1993. From her mother, Josefina learned to plant trees. She felt the satisfaction of having a garden in the yard with her abundant food for her family. She learned to love and respect her environment and has been an environmental activist ever since. Next, Ashwin Gopi is an entrepreneur, researcher, and engineer from Brooklyn who uses design thinking to fight food waste. As COO of Rise Products, he brings together diverse actors, resources, and technology to convert overlooked byproducts into healthy, tasty, and sustainable ingredients. His previous work was in international development, focusing on empowerment of disenfranchised women through community building and resilience. Ashwin also worked on analyzing and building multinational organizational culture at Mars Incorporated. He hails from India, where he studied mechanical engineering with a focus on automation. Ashwin graduated from NYU with a PhD on technology management and wrote his doctoral dissertation on technology and labor in on-demand and algorithmically managed work. He currently teaches technology strategy and entrepreneurship, as has been mentioned, here at the New School, as well as at NYU. Tagan Engel is an organizer, entrepreneur, chef, artist, and mentor who has dedicated her life to the liberation of all people and the planet. She has over 25 years experience across many sectors of the food system, as well as in equitable community and economic development. She has worked as a chef and entrepreneur in New York City, Boston, and New Haven, Connecticut, as community food systems director for City Seed, where she ran community-driven food and farm access programs, garden education, and supported sustainable business entrepreneurship development. Currently, Tagan is a resident fellow at the Yale Center for Business and the Environment, where she leads work on regenerative food systems, diversity, equity, and inclusion, practices for a new economy, and building respective relationships with local communities. She is also the executive producer of The Table Underground, a radio show and podcast where she records stories on food, radical love, race, and creative social justice. And last but certainly not least, Stacy L Flanagan is the director of the City of Jersey's Department of Health and Human Services. In this role, she has created policies to engage community stakeholders and combat food insecurity, such as enhancing farmers market policies and creating the Division of Food and Nutrition. In 2019, Flanagan began work on a pilot with the World Economic Forum's Healthy Cities and Communities platform to focus on measurable interventions to reduce food insecurity and enhance food sovereignty through private sector partnerships in technology, access to healthy food, and education. The city has contracted with Aero Farms, a vertical indoor farming company, to launch Healthy Greens JC, the first in the nation municipal vertical farm public-private partnerships. A lot of words there. Stacy is also a New School alumna, as has been mentioned, with a BA in political science and an MS in nonprofit management from Milano here at the university. So welcome and thank you all again for joining us. We'll now move into the panel, and we ask the audience again to keep your mics off and please place your questions in the chat for the question and answer following the panel. So to begin, we would like to ask each panelist to discuss their organization or their agency's work as it relates to the themes of today's session: food entrepreneurship, sustainability, and social justice, and maybe talk about some of your key activities and some of the challenges that your work seeks to address. And I think that we were going to ask Cara to speak first. Are you there, Cara? Maybe she had to step away, or they had to step away. Perhaps we could move to Josefina. Could you tell us a bit about your work?
Well, in 2011, I was having
I'm just going to can you hear me?
Crisis in United States, and a few community leaders, we started to looking a way to create a job and bring safe job and socio-economic and development for poor and low-income people. That's when we started to take advantage of the Boston regulation that not allow the big business throw wasting food in the landfill. So that's at the beginning of 2011. We started operation in October 14, 2014. We very little research, but a lot of people we be drink, and we build this building that provide food waste and composting to the large business in Boston, and a lot of community people, small business, because they are concerning about environment and they want to take a step. We have a big customer like Northeast University, BU, and another private corporate that I'm not going to mention here. And the reality that we are collecting about 90 tons of wasting food every week. Some of this wasting food going to the plant waste processing, made soil, and coming back to the garden and the farm. And some of this food that is fruit, vegetable, we deliver to the farm for food for the farm animal. What we looking here is that we settle a big change for Boston neighborhood. Before a zero in Boston neighborhood, let's see, Dorchester, Roxbury, JP. The people, the media talking about green economy, but nobody have a clue what was green economy. Nobody have a green economy yet. So Zero made a huge impact in Boston community. Now the people are very engaged. People, small business, they are composting with us and they take this job very serious. And at the meantime, it's bio for low-income people. We have a 9 full-time employee with decent salary, working in democracy workplace when they allow to make the decision. So, and we build a very close relationship with the people that we work in, our customer. It's a partnership. I'm learning from this job that it's a hard job and it's having a lot of challenges because we have the culture outside is not democracy workplace. It's not made the people make decisions in the work and where they work. And when you have this dream and you practice that in your workplace, it's a big challenge because a lot of people never do it before, never have the opportunity, and they don't know. I know this is a big challenge with the oppression culture and internal oppression that we see every day. And another big challenge that we see is that the huge amount of the food that is wasted here in the United States. And it's painful because a lot of people in the world doesn't have a food. They die because they don't have a food. And the big wasting food is not in the small business or in the neighborhood community. The big wasting food came for the wealthy food chain. And we have a customer that we collect every week about 3 tons of wasting food. And the driver told me, Josefina, the food that is in the barrel, you can eat it. That's nothing wrong with the food. And I was very curious about that. Why I didn't, I went to this place at 7 in the morning. I went inside and my surprise was that all the food that is in the places over there, vegetable, fruit, all that kind of stuff, they had to take it away and throw in the barrel because the food is not shining. It's not because the food is bad. It's because the food is not shining for the wealthy customer that they have it. So that's the painful reality. And I think so it's a big challenge for us, for the people who are concerned about this reality. And I think so the education for the new generation is can make the difference here. Because with education and information, the people can change behavior. We see people in our community that they change behavior about food. This had to be more bigger. This had to be for everywhere, and I think so. The change can be done. We are doing here a small change, and I'm very happy about that. So I think so. When more people can involve, more change can be done. That's I believe. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So inspiring to hear about this work. So we now have Cara back online after some technical difficulties. So I'd like to pass it over to Cara.
Thank you. Yes, I was having some technical difficulties, but I'll go ahead and try to share my screen again. Can everybody see that?
Yes.
Okay. Yes. Just present. Okay. Okay. So hi everyone. I'm Cara. I'm the Food Entrepreneurship Program Manager for City Seed and a co-founder for the Restorative Food Justice Project at Emerge, and both organizations are in New Haven, Connecticut. Before I go into the key activities of my programs, I want to give a brief context to both of these organizations that I work with. City Seed is an organization founded in 2004, and their mission is to engage the community in growing an equitable local food system that promotes economic development, community development, and sustainable agriculture. City Seed hosts the farmers markets in New Haven, and they also run Sanctuary Kitchen, a social enterprise program that provides multicultural catering and food products to support employment of refugees and immigrants to New Haven. We also offer food business incubation, which I've led for the past year. City Seed Incubates provides a food business accelerator program, other workshops, technical advising, coaching, resources, and a certified commercial kitchen space for local entrepreneurs. Our focus for Incubates is on reducing barriers to food entrepreneurship among chefs from New Haven's diverse communities, many of whom are refugees, immigrants, and people of color, and, while promoting their cultural heritage and stories. My work with Emerge started 2 years ago to lead in the development of a food program for people returning home from prison, and occurs concurrently with my role at City Seed. Some brief context about Emerge. Emerge is a social enterprise that operates a transitional employment program for adults returning to the New Haven area after incarceration. They offer paid training in construction and property maintenance, along with mentorship and program services geared towards destigmatizing mental health. These factors all greatly influence recidivism. 3 years post-release from prison, only 14% of Emerge crew members find themselves reincarcerated, compared to a 66% national average. When I started work with this program in early 2020, food insecurity of returning citizens wasn't really being addressed at the time. So I met with some of the leadership staff, as seen here, Ronaldo, Maurice, and Alden, and we started having discussions about the role that food plays in reentry. So over the next year, we designed a program combining components of restorative justice, food justice. We integrated horizontal leadership in the program and designed a participatory curriculum with workshops in food systems education, holistic and cultural cooking, sustainable urban agriculture, and food safety certification. And in June of 2022, we're also going to add a pathway to these classes, which includes food and farming entrepreneurship, which is something that the crew members have really expressed that they want to dive into. The classes are created by surveying and talking to the crew members who are participating in the program, and they're led by the help of local BIPOC food systems leaders. And it's so we focus on the food insecurity of returning citizens, and through this program, we really dive deep into the geographic, economic, nutritional, and political injustices from the point of view of the crew members. So I'm also going to give a brief context of New Haven for those of you who aren't familiar. That's some pictures from the classes that we had last year, some of the core components of the classes, which I'll go more in depth into later. So for New Haven, it's a city of about 134,000 people. Of those people, 31% of those people are Hispanic or Latino, 32% are Black, 5% are Asian, 4% are multiracial, less than 1% are Indigenous, and 29% are white. 48% of residents are low income, and 26% are living in poverty. And food insecurity rates here, as you can see in this diagram, are 22% and 27% among Black and Latinx adults, respectively. So there's a clear issue, there's a clear need to address food insecurity in New Haven, especially as it relates to people coming home from prison and people of color and immigrants and refugees. So before I talk about the key activities, I'm also going to talk about some of the barriers that I've seen in my work over the past 2 years. In 2012, it was reported that in New Haven, 5,000 local businesses were owned by white people, and over 3,000 were owned by people of color. So even though, 39% of all owned businesses in New Haven are run by people of color, but almost 2/3 of New Haven residents are people of color. So New Haven's entrepreneurial landscape is not consistently being represented by diverse background stories and products. In the context of food, in New Haven, there are over 60 Italian restaurants, many of them pizza places. But in comparison, there are only 4 Vietnamese restaurants in New Haven. So why is this happening? It's not because Black, Indigenous, people of color don't want to start their own businesses or don't have the skills. 94% of the ventures I work with at City Seed are BIPOC, and 100% of the current crew members at Emerge are BIPOC. And they all are at the very early stages of entrepreneurship, thinking about entrepreneurship and starting the process, and there's a definite need for support. So as somebody who's experienced poverty for over 15 years, I can speak to a few of the following barriers, but when there are added layers of race, immigration status, and experience with incarceration, the barriers are much more widespread, which is why there's a significant need for intersectional approaches. The following barriers have been expressed by the entrepreneurs who I work with at City Seed and the crew members who I work with at Emerge. There's fear of failure. Many people have gone through poverty and food insecurity, have low levels of confidence and self-esteem, and high occurrences of stress, trauma, depression, and anxiety. It's incredibly hard to plan and envision a path of owning your own business when, one, many people have not experienced ownership, and two, many people have gone through poverty and food insecurity, are used to things like housing being taken away from them abruptly, and then have to stressfully pivot and adapt, and also carry that with them for a very long time. There's also funding, startup capital. Black entrepreneurs are almost 3 times more likely than white people to have profits negatively impacted by access to capital. A lot of the ventures I work with have other jobs. Most of our ventures are parents, work a full-time job, and have a business on the side, trying to survive, and they don't have time to, create and develop a marketing strategy. A lot of people aren't able to pay for ingredients and even consider value added in local products and the development of their business. There are also zoning regulations, historical redlining, gentrification, and very high cost of rent that's increasing. And financial projections. A lot of the ventures that we work with have difficulty with math, education, and they have very different learning styles. And food system, everywhere, but especially in the food system, in the restaurant industry, there's rampant racism, sexism, and xenophobia, verbal and sexual abuse from working in restaurants. And this can be a driver for becoming a food entrepreneur and creating your own place. Black businesses bring in an average revenues of $1 million compared to $6.5 million for non-Black businesses, according to the Brookings Institution. So these are just a couple of the barriers, but then also on another level, there's the lasting stigma of incarceration. We live in a country where communities affected by mass incarceration are considered less than because of the flaws of the individuals that live there, as opposed to the policies and laws that create mass disinvestment. The title of criminal is a serious burden that affects relationships, job opportunities, upward mobility, health, and wellness. It's estimated that there are roughly 45,000 laws, policies, and sanctions in the US that target people with criminal records. When people are released from prison, neighborhoods are often ill-equipped to provide returning citizens with the resources that they need to thrive. Incarceration ensures difficulties securing gainful employment after release for many reasons, including the criminal history box and job applications, changes in well-being, and other obstacles. It's post-release employment is consistently perceived as the most influential factor on successful reentry. It is the single most important predictor of recidivism among Black returning citizens, who account for 70% of unemployment violations. Ultimately, if you don't have an income, you can't pay for food. Because of this, many people who leave prison want to open their own business, but the path to entrepreneurship is met with not just barriers I just mentioned, but other legal obstacles and tough to navigate governmental processes. For example, within the city of New Haven, when applying for a food vendor's license, the applicant must go through a criminal background check. And this obstacle can inhibit the path towards upward mobility and successful community reintegration. Also, with city and state processes and paperwork, a lot of them are really tough to understand. They're not very accessible. They're often only in English. And there are few resources that help alleviate these points, but they're tough to find. They're buried within a website, contain numerous links. All of these points speak to the,
Cara, thank you so much. We want to make sure we have space for the next speakers too. So maybe just say a couple things and we'll move on to the more of this too in the second question that we have.
Okay, yeah, I could talk about the key activities the second time.
Thank you so much. It's really setting the context for so much of this work in the broader structural inequities that exist in our society and clearly emanate in the food system. And really that's at the core of some of the concerns that I think we're talking about in this panel today. So thank you very much for that. I want to now pass it on to the next panelist, who is going to be Ashwin Gopi.
Hi, everybody. What's up? So I had a whole thing prepared, but Josefina, everything she said applies to me as well. I have exactly the same experience and challenges. So I work slightly differently, also with food waste, but specifically I work with food waste that are byproducts from the manufacturing process of food. So originally I'm a mechanical engineer, but I've always been interested in this idea of like, how do we turn waste into a resource? And one of the most incredible things is that, it's true, like people are dying of hunger and 40% of all the food we grow is wasted for like reasons like, like it's not good enough. It doesn't look good enough. Literally there are like machine learning algorithms, they are used to reject fruits, to automatically sort them. And this also is true for how large organizations purchase fruits and vegetables. And there's also other sources of waste like logistics, just loss in harvesting, transportation and all that. But in addition to that, what really goes unmeasured is food waste, that is a byproduct of manufacturing. Manufacturing, especially the more streamlined you make your manufacturing process, the larger you scale it, the larger amount of waste you create. In order to standardize how food should look and move through machines, we remove so much of it. So you end up with like an incredibly large amount of things like peels, and pulp and things like that. Specifically in the beer industry, the way beer is made is that you boil roasted barley for about an hour or two, and then you remove all the sugar, and you take it away to ferment it, into beer, into alcohol. But what's left behind is all the protein and the fiber of the barley. And exactly like like they just don't know what to do with it, especially in cities, where there are not really a lot of farms nearby where they can transport it. So that was a huge challenge, and they were like paying to get it hauled away from Brooklyn and get it dumped in Jersey, Pennsylvania, Virginia. So really far distances, and those trucks then have to still drive back empty, so incredibly wasteful as well. So what we really thought of doing was finding a way to like close the loop locally. So to be able to collect, spent barley from breweries, convert it into flour, because one of the main challenges with food waste is that it spoils really quickly. So extending its shelf life, and then like, so that now you have 1 year to kind of get it incorporated into, high fiber, low carb, high protein, all the way from like cookies to pizza dough, to bread, so there are different applications for it. And one of the biggest challenges I feel is this notion of it's cultural, like the perception of food waste and having to eat food waste. It's a cultural barrier that we need to cross. And that's why, Josefina was saying, you need more education. You also this severe lack of infrastructure. Because we think of it as waste, we treat it as waste, and so it becomes very easy to just, and very cheap, but these are artificial costs. We just dump it in a landfill somewhere, so it seems artificially cheap, but we still do it. And so, really, those are the barriers, but also, infrastructure, logistics is a huge challenge. Dealing with food waste, it means that needs to be just more ways to move food in a city. So kind of like closing things like cold chain in the last mile delivery is a challenge. But also I think it's not just enough to keep your carbon emissions low, it's also, as Josefina was saying, you need to build an organization that is democratic. You can't just be creating like green products but then keep exploiting your workers. So also we focus on like hiring specifically previously incarcerated women in Queens with working with the Economic Development Corporation, and giving them like dignified work and respect in the workplace is really important. It's not, you have to subvert capitalism, not just by, because like taking waste and turning it into food is a very neoliberal idea. Even though it produces positive environmental impact, you have to subvert other aspects of your business in order for it to be justice, like redistributing your food, and so on. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the through lines that you've been able to draw already through the other speakers. So inspiring. So we'll pass it next to Tagan Engel.
Hello, everyone. My name is Tagan Engel. I'm very honored to be on this panel with everyone and agree with what Ashwin just said, that so many things that have been mentioned resonate very much for me with the work that I do. So I will try to share some things that are a little bit different, to add rather than repeat anything in the conversation so far. I'm also based in New Haven, and the work that I do is connected to what Cara does as well. So I'll start sharing a little bit about work that I did as an entrepreneur and as a chef, kind of on an individual level, and then move briefly into kind of working on these things at a more systemic level. So I started out actually working in social justice as an educator, but I followed my heart into cooking and worked as a chef and owned a small catering company in Boston and New York for almost a decade. And in that capacity, I worked on social justice issues and sustainability issues in a few different ways. One of them was as a chef that I spent a lot of time advocating for workers in kitchens that I was in. So as someone who has citizenship in this country, who has white skin privilege, also has some financial security, I used that position to advocate for people who didn't have those privileges in kitchens that I was working in. I also speak Spanish and Portuguese, and that helped me to communicate with people in the kitchens and sometimes be able to have conversations that management or leadership didn't understand what was being discussed, and have more honest conversations, but really try to advocate for people. And so on a real individual level, that was a way as an entrepreneur and as a chef that I was able to have some impact on individual social justice issues for people and workers' rights issues in particular. And then some other examples were sustainability in purchasing. So using money to impact the system, such as purchasing regeneratively or sustainably grown foods, whether they're from small farms or from larger distributors, supporting Black and Brown producers, and really trying to move purchasing dollars to support the food system that supports workers and that supports sustainable and regenerative growing practices. Another example that's already been talked about is composting. So actually doing the in the kitchen work to implement composting in kitchens, which is not always the easiest thing to get people to do when they haven't been used to doing that, but getting that set up so that food is at least turning into compost and not going into the trash. And also addressing cleaning supplies. So a lot of harm that I saw in kitchens was the toxins in toxic cleaning, getting cleaning supplies that are not as toxic and harmful to the skin of the people who are using them and lungs of people who are using them, as well as cleaning supplies that are less harmful to the environment. So beyond that, I moved out of the kitchen and have spent the last 15 years working on food and social justice issues, more community-based approaches to this work, and with a real focus on racial and economic equity issues. And Cara already mentioned a lot of those things. I worked also at City Seed for 8 years before Cara joined, but we worked on how could we support urban growers and use the farmers markets as a platform to help people have a market for their products, test people who are producing new products, have the farmers market be a place where we could support Black and Brown food entrepreneurs in testing products and starting to build a following to help launch their businesses. And then doing one-on-one coaching with them around how to do food sourcing, how to get investors and other kinds of things like that. I'm glad that Cara mentioned this, but one of the really big things that I found in coaching entrepreneurs is, we're looking at taking a systemic approach to understanding the inequities that exist in our society, which Cara laid out really beautifully. And we're looking at capitalism, colonialism, and white supremacy, really creating an environment where profits tend to be valued over people and the planet. And so when we want to help Black and brown entrepreneurs and low-income entrepreneurs, we are looking at that context of what are the systemic inequities that exist. And so this can be land access, it can be access to funding and other things. And I wanted to also name that and I think Josefina also mentioned this, the internalized oppression that can really be a barrier to people really feeling that they are worthy of asking for money, or things that white entrepreneurs or people who grow up in wealthy environments sort of take for granted, that I am worthy of this, I can ask for this, and can kind of have a big vision that goes beyond a 1 or 2 person business. And so those are really significant barriers that can exist for entrepreneurs. And then at a systemic level, a lot of my work right now has to do with coaching entrepreneurs, and both through community-based groups as well as through some work I'm doing at the Yale Center for Business and the Environment. And through this, I have been working on helping entrepreneurs and people working with organizations to really look at these things through a systemic lens, so that we see when we do business as usual, then we are replicating the exploitation of humans and the planet. And so we have to really intentionally do things differently if we want to not be replicating that oppression. And so some of the ways that I'm working with entrepreneurs to do this, I've been building some toolkits to help people ask themselves these questions and figure this out as they're going. But some of those things have to do with identifying different business models. So a cooperative model, like Sarah, composting as a cooperative model, looking at ways to distribute power and money and benefits across an organization, so that we're not just using a kind of capitalist hierarchical structure where wealth gets concentrated. Really looking at workers' rights. A lot of times people in the food movement and in food businesses think a lot about organic food and locally sourced food, but people aren't always thinking about the workers' rights and workers throughout the supply chain. So farm workers, kitchen workers, people in manufacturing. It can be harder to find out that information because we have like an organic certification, right? You can look at a label on a food and see that it's organic certified. There aren't many certifications or visible ways to see how are the workers treated across the supply chain. So that takes more work to figure that out. And then also looking at the details of environmental practices, regenerative environmental practices of that people can do as they're working in food businesses. And I've already mentioned some of those things. So I'll just leave it at that. I know we have a lot more to talk about, but that's some of the work that I have been doing.
Thank you, Tagan. One of the most inspiring things about this panel right now is that everyone has so many different experiences and perspectives that they're bringing to the table. And I think this is all part of understanding, the connections between entrepreneurship and sustainability and justice. So thank you so much for this. So we'll now pass it to Stacey.
So hello, everyone. Thanks for joining today. I want to share, because everything that everyone said so far has just been so incredibly engaging. And I feel like a little bit of what we're doing in Jersey City is pulling some of those pieces and practicing that out across a city, and investing the money in neighborhoods where we feel is really worthwhile for us to engage from an entrepreneurial space. Since I've come to Jersey City, and that was about 8.5 years ago, we had to redesign our food truck ordinance, because there were people with food truck licenses living all over the country. And it was actually boxing out some entrepreneurs and next generation leadership, and people were selling them in a very gray economy for lots and lots of money. So the first thing that actually occurred when I got here was to do a little bit about research and what kind of value people were putting to a piece of paper and how that was keeping some people out of our neighborhoods to express food entrepreneurship, which was so very important to us, and the diversity in food truck and the food economy, and then like going from food truck. And so we look at it here in Jersey City. It's either kind of starting to sell your wares at a farmer's market, which, you know, forced us to engage in policy making there, to maybe a food truck, and then possibly brick and mortar as like a growth industry in the food world. And while we thought we had a lot of things in place, this is the most important piece, is right, where the community wants things, and where the community is going to engage, and making sure that we align a lot of those partnerships. So I will say most of my career has been guided by the work being done in New Haven, right? Because I think that was like at the forefront of corner stores, and really looking at disparity in food access from, you know, 20 something years ago to today, where we still see that. So I'm going to share just a few things that we're doing in Jersey City. And you know, all of this I obviously learned from the new school, because with a master's in nonprofit management, it's really like engaging in you know, third sector efforts and really trying to make that connection. And this connection doesn't happen overnight. And we here have, you know, this vision of access for all, and so food for all, and food is obviously at the table, to invite everyone to it, and to make sure that there are tables in every neighborhood that can invite people to it. And with COVID, and so that's what I think you can see all the random things in my office. With COVID, we saw that food was actually like pulling more and more people apart. Our restaurant economy was really difficult to maintain, and really trying to figure out ways that we can leverage those relationships to keep our local restaurants open, while also serving people that were impacted by COVID. So, and then in the middle of all of this thinking through, we still have a food waste issue. We still have, you know, people interested in composting, where whether at our farmers markets or other, and I'll share a little bit of all of that. I did I'm popping open a few items to share my screen. And so one of the things Kristin shared with you was our Healthy Greens JC program that's just kicking off. We're gonna have a really large event in March, and I'll make sure everyone's invited. But this is where we're really looking at, and I'm just gonna give you just a little clip. This is Jersey City.
Can't hear it, Stacey.
Can't hear it. You have to share the sound. You have to click share sound.
Where am I sharing sound? But can you share sound?
You have to go into preferences on the upper left-hand corner of your screen where you see Zoom Us, or in the upper left-hand. Do you see Zoom Us?
No.
Or perhaps we could just look at the images. How would that work for you? While we're waiting for the technical. While we're waiting, I want to encourage folks, if you have questions, to put them in the chat. And if they're a question for one or more specific speakers, you can note that as well. Well, now, Stacey, you're completely muted. Maybe we could just look at some of the images, and then we have just about 10 minutes left in our speaker session here. And so we can maybe move on also to thinking about some of the other questions around sector. But perhaps we could see some of the images and then transition.
Yeah, so sorry about that. I was trying to share the screen. What I will do is I'll put this in the chat so you can see a little bit about the Aero Farms, the connectivity, where we're going with that most particularly is we have an EPA technical assistance grant for local food, local places. So we can bring a production farm to a vocational school, marry that with our efforts around food waste and composting, upcycling with some of our partners, training the next generation in one of our Black and brown neighborhoods right here in our community where the health department is stationed, so that we can drive more workforce development in the food system and reduce some of the food deserts in this particular community. So we have a few different programs related to that we're trying to bridge the gap between the entrepreneurs in the community that are already doing the work, the next generation youth going through vocational schools for that, and ensuring that all of this work is done in a sustainable systems approach so that we can engage from every level.
Thank you. Really, some of what you've talked about regarding the public-private partnerships, I think really is, well, it leads us into the next set of questions. I'll just say it that simply. So thank you very much, Stacey. We have represented on our panel, as you've all heard, community-based nonprofits, community-based activists, sole proprietors, cooperatives, government. And so I'm gonna try to ask you each to address 2 questions at once in the remaining 10 or so minutes that we have total. And so the first is, how did you come to the decision, or how has the type of legal entity that you work within enabled you to work in any specific way to address the food systems challenges that you're aiming to address? So it's about sector or the legal entity of your operation or organization. And then if you have maybe a one-sentence recommendation for hopeful food entrepreneurs who are hoping to engage with sustainability or equity through their work. So maybe I can pass it to, we'll maybe go in the same order as before, and if each person could maybe answer those questions in a minute or so. So I guess we'll go to Josefina to keep with our order.
Zero Co-op is a legally registered like corporate, because in the United States, you don't have in the Constitution on the legal system, nothing clear about co-op. So many of the states doing a lot of small stuff and they try, but it's not something that you can say and go to the corporate department and say, hey, my business is a co-op. You have to say it's a corporate. Internally, our bylaw, our worker policies, all are focused in co-op model. I believe it deeply in co-op model because it's total against this oppressive system that build so much injustice and so much oppression. In co-op, you have the people have the opportunity to develop themselves. The people have the opportunity to make the decision. The people feel empowered. So that's why I believe in co-op. And still, we are registered like co-op. We pay every year a corporate taxes that we have to do it. And we have to comply with all the regulation by federal and state by the corporate. So, but internally, we are operator like a co-op business where the worker made the decision and everything is made profit made work for the workers, for the people have a salary, benefit, and better life that the people never have it before. That's the goal.
Thank you. So I'll pass it now to Cara. That was our order.
Thank you. Okay, I'll try to do this really quickly. So I work at City Seed, which is a nonprofit, and I work with Emerge, which is another nonprofit, and I work on I work with a very community-driven approach, between workshop development, the resources that we offer, working collaboratively, working to help people gain confidence in their business, working with partners and mentors that have lived experiences. I don't think I can, now I know I couldn't really do the same thing if I worked in a corporation. I'm very fortunate that both organizations, so I started the Restorative Food Justice Project that emerged from the ground up. And with Incubates, they were doing work with food business incubation before, which Tagan actually started. But when I came on about a year ago, they really just, let me envision the program and do this work and do work on a very community-based level to integrate culture, to integrate, building wealth and identifying how can you build wealth in New Haven. And I know I couldn't do that with a corporation, but in terms of working for the government, I'm very fortunate that in New Haven, we are one of the few cities that has a food systems policy division, and they're doing they're working on a lot of these issues, including entrepreneurship. And because New Haven's such a small city, the director of the food systems policy division has worked one-on-one with local beekeepers. And I don't think that happens in a lot of other cities. So with these key activities that I'm engaged in, building wealth, integrating culture in the programs, and having community-driven programs, I'm very, very fortunate to work with two organizations that, allow me to do this work.
Thank you. I think a number of you all have that situation. It seems really advantageous in a lot of ways. Let's see, I've lost track of our order here. Ashwin.
Hi, thanks very much. Actually, again, Josefina already said everything I wanted to say. I just wanted to, reinforce that idea that a C Corp, when I tell people that, yeah, my company is a C Corp, people's first reaction is boo, but a C Corp is just an ownership structure, and it's a pretty flexible one. And one of the things that you can do with a C Corp is assign people permanent ownership. You can say, hey, this is yours now, and no one can take that from you, which, for other kind of legal structures are more difficult to do. Also, as a C Corp, there is more flexibility. There is more ability to do things like fundraising and so on. So there's a benefit. However, I do agree that's completely separate from the way that your organizational charter is written. And when you're creating basically the constitution of your company, in there, you can include your ideology, your, and what way you believe about hierarchy and decision making and all that. And that's the place for that, and that process, I think, should be done collaboratively, especially if you're trying to create a co-op model, it's so important. And so that's what I want to let food entrepreneurs out there know, because I think that was the second question, right? What they should know is that, there's a lot of opportunity out there. There's a lot of waste out there. And there are a lot of hungry people, but at the same time, there are a lot of creative ways in which you can organize your operations and your organization itself in order to create equitable and just systems. You can build equity and justice into the very nature of your organization. You can do things like use blockchain to build those values into every transaction that your organization makes. So I think it requires commitment, but there are also a lot of tools out there to help you build it into practice.
Yeah, so appreciate the reminder about creative and dynamic thinking in working through all of this. Thank you. I think Tagan is the next one.
Thank you. I'm really enjoying hearing everyone's answers so far. I will say, I feel like I've sort of moved as an entrepreneur through all the different places that I have worked, whether it's a nonprofit or working with the city or at a university or as an entrepreneur. So I think I've kind of often worked in ways that I could be more independent so that I could build networks and do things more creatively and kind of bypass some of the bureaucratic barriers. But as for the second question, some of the biggest challenges, so just to really name it, like the biggest challenges are these systemic oppressions that maintain like racialized capitalism. Like that's just, that's the biggest challenge, like poverty and, and systemic racism and other oppressions are certainly the biggest challenges, but a lot of ways that that shows up really specifically. One of the biggest challenges here in New Haven is space. And I think that goes for a lot of people, like so many food entrepreneurs cannot find kitchens, cannot find storage space. So unless people have a lot of money to start a business with, space tends to be one of the largest barriers. And then funding, of course, is a huge barrier. Some of the ways that I think that myself and many other people working in this area tried to support people is that, and the things I would suggest to overcome some of these things are focusing on building relationships and finding supports. So sometimes with an entrepreneurial spirit, there can be this real like individualism, like I'm gonna do it all myself. And part of what can be hard is that, people who are coming from more wealthy spaces, or if they're doing a business, but their parents had run a business, they're just intrinsically already learning things and having resources around that. And so when we don't come from those spaces, we need to intentionally build those networks and those relationships. And it can make the work so much better and so much easier when we're not alone. So whether it's like another business that's similar that we can learn from, maybe they're a few years ahead of us, or just whether it's advice on how to do marketing or how to do fundraising. So really making sure to spend time building relationships and finding those supports. And then on the sustainability and social justice front, I think things like doing purchasing collectively. So as an example, a lot of corner stores don't carry a lot of fresh food in New Haven. It's different than New York, where you have a lot of bodegas that have like full, have a lot more fresh food. And part of the challenge is that when you go to buy food from a distributor, you need to buy a whole case. So doing things where you're doing collective purchasing so that you can share across a number of businesses. And then one other thing I want to say is that as an individual business, you can work on larger social justice issues by joining collectives or by getting together with other people who are doing organizing and advocating and advocacy work. And so as one quick example, the Food System Policy Director Office in the city of New Haven was part of the work that myself and dozens of other people got together on a food policy council and advocated for that to happen so that our city would have leadership on these issues. And so those are ways that individual businesses can address systemic issues through partnerships and collaboration, organizing and advocacy, even if you can't do it with everything you're doing in your own business.
Thank you. This emphasis on collaboration that I think, as you pointed out, Tagan, can be sometimes counterintuitive in starting businesses seems to also be a theme that I'm hearing from everyone on the panel today.
Can I say something about it? When we, in 2011, we, myself and a few community leaders get together to try to build a business for us. We don't have 5 cents. We don't have 5 cents. And today we have a Ford truck and we have almost $1 million invest. And you know how we did that? We went everywhere. We went to the church, to talking with the people in the church. Mm-hmm. We went everywhere to talking with the people and made people came together. It was a huge campaign. Everybody did it in one way. Sometimes one of my coworkers come in and say, Josefina, they wanted you going to some school or some university. Do you know? They go, send me the address. I go and be there until I have to walk. I go and be there. And we built this, and that was put us forward. And that's why we are here. For all these social responsible people around, they don't have a place over here, but they are there. And you're going to find that the same you found the oppressor, you're going to find a lot of responsible, social responsible people from all the group, white people, black people, people from everywhere, because what made the people together is the idea, is the feeling. And that's bring the people together. That's not because you are brown or you are black or you are, no, it's the feeling, the idea, your ideology, and that's bring the people together. And you get these people together and you can be think all together. Totally agree with what you say.
Absolutely. Thank you. It's collective action and organizing as a strategy is what I'm hearing too. Thank you so much. Well, I want to pass it briefly to Stacy before we move on to some questions from the audience.
Well, so I think I mentioned obviously we're here, we're a municipality. It allows us to actually bring everyone together. A little bit of what everyone said, whether there's money or not money, like I have the money, I can invest. If there's no local community kitchen, that's one of the things that we had talked a lot about. Rising Tide Capital is based here in Jersey City. They're building out an amazing kitchen right here, space. When I decided that we should have a hunger-free Jersey City, because it's just our right to be able to, we started bringing food from all of the local partners because they valued the relationship at the city level. And then some community partners don't want to work with the government. So, I mean, most of my staff are actually on this call today so they can hear more about the work that's happening across the country, so we can engage more in hearing how other people work so that we can be even more effective in our work. So for us, being able to open the doors of government, reduce the bureaucracy, make things more streamlined, hear what the people need and execute on it is something like really valuable to us.
So appreciate and like the openness to learning, which is, I mean, I'm learning so much in our panel too, and you're going to take this back into my own work. So thank you all for all of your comments. We have a few questions that have come in, and so what I'd like to do is I'll read a question, and then whoever would like to jump in and briefly respond, we can take it that way. And so the first question is thanking Cara for their wonderful presentation, and what City Seed needs for its own growth in helping food entrepreneurs, if that is an objective. So that is a question for Cara, but if there are others that want to respond also, that would be fine too.
Yeah, thank you. So City Seed is very much projected for growth. We have a commercial kitchen, but that entrepreneurs can rent, but there's such a need for more space. We have the sanctuary kitchen chefs work there during the day, and you know, so the scheduling is we just need more space. So we're in the process of taking on that project, and having the commercial kitchen, like others have said, helps defray the costs helps defray startup costs. So as you know, with COVID, a lot of people were pivoting to online sales and not having brick and mortar locations, and working out of a commercial kitchen and selling your items online is definitely something that a lot of the ventures that we work with do. But also because City Seed is such a small organization, we have a very small staff, and you know, we all need to work collaboratively to get these, to address all of these issues.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to speak to that issue? Otherwise, I have another question here. Well, here's a question that's on many of our minds these days, which is how, this is for anyone and all of you, how has COVID impacted your work? I'll leave it at that.
That's a good question.
Would you like to answer
share?
it?
Oh, I was going to say, if Josefina doesn't share, I'd love to share, because we've seen, just our city was highly impacted by COVID right at the beginning when New York was. Most people coming back and forth on the PATH trains, bringing this. We saw a desperate need for food and food access in the very beginning when the schools started closing down, and like overnight, we started getting phone calls from all of our manufacturing partners asking us to help them move food. So from a place of the city, we were moving milk, we were moving food at pantries that were going to shut down because they didn't have the volunteer space. So that first 2 weeks, we had staff all over town just dropping food off at some of our senior buildings and things like that. So that was the first tier. Then we saw sort of a great increase of need. So our Meals on Wheels program tripled. And it still remains very high since pre-COVID days. And then we started seeing families that simply lost jobs. We pride ourselves on being the most diverse city in America. In fact, 42% of our residents are foreign born, and many of them do not qualify for federal food support systems, which became really significant to us. If someone's lost their job, doesn't have access, and especially in the restaurant industry, restaurants are closing back on kitchen staff that might be paid under the table, things like that, not having access to unemployment or basic food resources. And so we really pivoted to support this in so many ways by partnering with our food bank, getting food to families that didn't qualify for Meals on Wheels, and more interestingly, like government contracts of people that were driving for Medicare appointments didn't have work. So all these drivers didn't have work. So they came to work with us, dropping off all of this food because we didn't have enough drivers. And one of my staff that ran the Meals on Wheels program, I think he's finally starting to like breathe again because the last 2 years have been pretty significant in just getting food to people where they need it.
Good, yeah. You do an amazing job.
Would others like to speak to this question? How has COVID impacted your work?
Well, I can say to us, zero, because we working with many college here in Boston that they have a food wasting program, and the college went closed. So that's mean our revenue went down. But in operation, I'm in charge of the operation, and I talking with my team workers. So we implement many take a step to reduce the cost. We took some vehicle out the road. Later, I have it difficult to put it again back. And I send a driver to unemployment. So, and that's made us to balance, we lose the revenue, but we reduce the cost. But at the meantime, we struggle very hard with emotional part, because a lot of people are feeling, believe it or not, I dealing with drivers, CDO driver, men, and we believe it that they not have emotion, or they don't show the emotion, but it was pretty hard. It was very hard, and a lot of people need a lot of support, because the hope and all that can put the people very down. So for that part, we working a lot, try to support the people every day, energize the people to feel, yes, we're going to get it over and we're going to be better. So that part was very hard for us, yeah, especially for myself. Yeah. But we get it over, all the college came back and everybody's enthusiastic and happy again. So.
Can I? Okay, I can go next. Thanks, Josefina, for sharing. Even we had the same, very similar kind of challenges, where people were in the beginning were just like really freaked out, and especially for jobs, where you are in contact with people, right? When you're doing things like handing people, things to load into a truck and stuff like that. One of the things that we had to do very quickly and very early on is figure out how to best protect everybody along the supply chain, so actually like working with breweries and figuring out how to do like things like no contact pickups and drop-offs, and even during like processing, how to do social distancing. I think those were the kind of main challenges. It's like, how do we protect ourselves when we know so little, about this condition. So in the beginning, I think that was a huge challenge. On the other hand, there were some like opportunities too, like more people started baking at home.
Yeah.
So,
people bake. And the people looking in the TV and in the computer for the receipt, how to learn.
Exactly. Yeah.
Thank you. Stacy or Tagan, would you like to, or Cara, would you like to speak to this question? Okay, hearing none, I can ask another question here. One is, if those of you who have cooperative businesses, if you could share more about your structures and practices.
I can go first. So I think one of the important things is kind of, really try to figure out how to instill sort of like convergent and divergent modes of decision making, where I believe in like using like direct democracy. I think one person, one vote, despite so for instance, writing it into the charter of your organization that each person has one vote, and it is not related to the amount of ownership of shares that you have. So therefore, it's not the shares that is voting, it is the person that is voting. And it doesn't matter how much shares they own. That way, you're not going to try to do some sort of like weird legal trickery. It's just literally just democracy. And also, I think that would be the main thing. It's kind of like separating ownership from decision making within an organization. Would be the main way of like structuring it. I think there's other things that you can do, such as like committing to redistributing profits to workers at the end of the year. I'm trying to think. There's just so many things that you can do. I highly recommend checking out platform cooperatives, which something that a school of thought that actually exists in the new school as well, where I'm going to throw that in the chat if you want to learn more specifically about how do you build, especially large scale online cooperatives, which is, I think, is an interesting emergent organizational form.
Thank you. And others who have cooperative structures would like to speak to this question.
I think so. Like I say, I a deeply co-op person because any business can be a co-op. Any economy activity can be a co-op. The required is that the people can and working together for common wealth. So we're going to share the rich, but we're going to share the profit. When we have the problem, we all going to have the problem. But when we have the good time, all going to have a good time. And we going to be available to make our decision. It's amazing the potential in the creativity that the simple people have. It. Most amazing job can be fixed and find the easy solution when you're talking with the people in the ground. And important that the people can make decisions for themselves. And the people care more when the people feel they have an ownership. Our drivers do the best job because they are part of the business. If the business going bad, they lose it. But if the business going well, they win. So it's not like it's on one person. And build this relation that is not the oppression relation. It's the co-working in the democracy environment relation. That is totally different than what we have it for 100 years. So I think so it's the difference is you, and it's different and the people can learning from each other and working with each other, not one person BCC, the whole group BCC. We working for the whole group of BCC, you know, that building that authentic community relationship. That's I thinking about it.
Thank you. Anyone else that would like to speak to this question? Thank you very much. I will ask one other question, which is, I'll read it. Many Medicaid beneficiaries are nutrition insecure and have diet-related chronic diseases. Many Medicaid beneficiaries are also BIPOC folks. The federal government sets a mandatory standard for Medicaid programs. It would be so helpful if the federal government made medical nutrition therapy a mandatory service of state Medicaid programs. And so the person asking the question wonders if there is any research on this issue happening at the New School. I don't believe that there is, but I did want to point the audience to the a new institute at the New School that is not necessarily doing research on this particular question, but some related questions. And this is the Institute on Race, Power, and Political Economy, led by Dr. Derek Hamilton. And so if that could be of interest, I've put the website in the chat. We have just about a few minutes left, and we have a few closing words we'd like to say. And so I think I'll just ask if anyone would like to give any one sentence comment from each of the panelists before I pass it back over to Latha.
Can I go first just to address the previous question? Mm-hmm. Okay, and this will also hopefully be the last sentence I say is that why should SNAP not allow you to buy hot food? You know, especially when the argument against it is that what people will use it to buy fast food. So what? You know, like, so what? That's an economic problem. Fix that separately. Stop punishing poor people by not allowing them to use SNAP and EBT benefits to buy hot food. That's ridiculous. Really, really stupid, you know. And I know, and why only homeless people and old people, you know, everyone who's eligible for SNAP and EBT should be allowed to buy, you know, at the same time, very good, you know, our governor currently has legalized the ability to use SNAP benefits to purchase hot food if you are a senior citizen or homeless. But let's extend that to everybody. You know, why punish poor people for economic problems that they didn't create? You know?
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you. Next panelist that would like to give their one sentence concluding remark.
I'll say a quick thing. Just I saw Austin's question about kind of large scale gaps in policy and things. I think we really need to have our governments and address the exploitation of workers, in particular farm workers and people working in food production, because everyone working in food is inherently supporting slave labor and exploitation and harm to humans just by purchasing most of the food that's produced in our country. And if we don't have regulations that stop that and change it, and it will just keep going. Our country is based on agricultural slave labor. That's how this colonized country was founded, and it's continuing that way on a global level, and it needs to end.
Thank you. Who's next? Your one sentence concluding remark.
I can go next. 100% agree with both Tagan and Ashwin on both of those topics, and those definitely need to be talked about a lot more because those are significant issues. But the last sentence is that us as advocates and people who work in food justice, we need to listen to those who are directly affected and include their knowledge and customs as part of project design, because a lot of the people who I work with, their stories disappear in traditional discussions regarding food inequity.
Thank you. Josefina, your one sentence concluding remark.
Well, I think so. We have the same issue for 100 years, and we suffer for the same before our ancestors, now today us. And I think so we have to start to do something different to change that reality. Because it doesn't work, so something is broken. So we the people, we have to start to do something different. And when I was working about 15 years ago, I was working in human service and I working with homeless people, drug people, battle women. And I started to realize something had to be changed here. I can't do this forever. Let's do something, maybe a small change. And that's why I started to try to be a co-op, because I wasn't happy with what I see every day. So I tried to do something different and look at the people who shared my feeling, my ideology to working with me. And that's
Thank you very much. And then Stacey,
bye, guys. Thank you.
last sentence.
I mean, I agree with what everyone has said to date. I think it's really important when we're making policies that impact people around us, that they're 100%, at the forefront of it, and really not pushing government away, but figuring out how. I mean, why I'm here is like how to make change from the inside, and that's going to be an important piece to the future of food work.
Thank you. Thank you to all of the panelists. I feel like we could stay and talk for another hour, but unfortunately we don't have that time. So I'm going to thank you. I'm going to pass it over to Latha, but I suppose my slide is up. So I will tell you all about Food Studies' next event, which is a keynote lecture with Dr. Julian Ageman from Tufts University on his concept of just sustainabilities. And he'll also be speaking to another key areas of his expertise, which is food justice. So you'll be receiving a link after this event, but you can also find it by looking at events.newschool.edu or emailing us at foodstudies@newschool.edu, and I will pass it to Latha.
All right, thank you, Kristin, and thank you, panelists. I think, everybody, you can see from the chat and the questions and the discussions and the back and forth that this was a dynamic panel as always, and extremely inspiring. And I really, really am grateful that I've been able to do this for almost 2 years now, hosting these every 2 weeks and getting, working with just amazing people. And our next event is on the role of nonprofits and philanthropy in building social movement. So we are kind of taking a critical lens to the field of philanthropy and how do they help and shape. And so please join us. It's February 23rd. So our events are usually first Thursdays and third Wednesdays. That's kind of our cadence. And we are starting to collect ideas for the third year, which will be 22-23. And we also have a book upcoming on management and social justice, which will come out end of this year. So it's very exciting that we've been able to create and hold the space for this great conversation. And so thank you everybody for joining, and thank you Jamie for all your support, and thank you Kristin. I really enjoyed getting to work with you a little bit and getting to know your work more. So be well everyone, and it's actually past my bedtime. I'm in India right now, but I am super charged. I thought I was going to be tired and feeling sleepy, but this has been so fabulous. So thanks everybody, and we'll see you next event.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.